There was a time in Hollywood when the notion of the hero loomed large, square-jawed men riding horseback across the silver screen, saving towns from outlaws, and rescuing damsels in distress with a certain polite swagger. One name that rose above all others in this pantheon was John Wayne. With a deliberate drawl and a stride so iconic that film buffs still mimic it decades later, Wayne emerged as the paragon of American ruggedness, a cinematic cowboy whose persona would symbolize a nation's fondness for grit, self-reliance, and moral certainty. Yet behind that cultivated myth of upright cowboy virtue lay a more complicated story. It was marked by scandals that yanked him out of the saddle and into a realm of broken vows, political crusades, personal outbursts, and a slow, brutal decline from cancer that forced even the Duke to square off against mortality. He won some battles and lost others, both in his private life and in the public eye, leaving behind a legacy that still sparks fervent debate among fans and critics. He was born Marion Robert Morrison in Winterset, Iowa, on May 26, 1907, although his middle name was eventually changed to Mitchell. For a boy who would grow into a figure of formidable size and presence, his early years were modest, marked by frequent relocations and a father who struggled to maintain financial stability. He was an unremarkable teen in Glendale, California, known more for his athleticism on the high school football field than any sign of future stardom. Marion, nicknamed Duke, after a loyal dog who padded alongside him through the streets, snagged a scholarship to USC, but an injury cut short his athletic aspirations. Seeking to make ends meet, he found odd jobs at the Fox lot, hauling props and assisting directors who recognized something in his calm, unhurried demeanor. He was neither flashy nor desperate. Instead, he carried himself with a kind of laconic ease that must have seemed out of sync with the eager dreamers around him. Before long, he landed small roles in B-movies, credited sometimes as Duke Morrison, sometimes not credited at all. A fortuitous meeting with director John Ford would soon alter his trajectory. John Wayne's big break came with The Big Trail in 1930, a giant production meant to herald a new kind of widescreen epic. Though the film flopped financially, studio executives saw potential in Wayne's imposing frame and stoic confidence. He was on track to become the ideal Western star, and as the years marched on, that persona took shape. The man in a wide-brimmed hat, eyes narrowed against desert dust, a resolute expression that suggested any adversity would be met head-on. In time, America would project its aspirations and anxieties onto this imposing figure. He seemed to embody frontier bravado, unwavering moral clarity. But behind the camera's illusions, his personal life was full of turbulence. By 1933, Wayne was in his mid-20s and had married Josephine Sayence, the daughter of a Panamanian consul. She was a devout Catholic, dedicated to her faith and the idea of a stable home. The couple seemed the epitome of early domestic bliss. Wayne had begun building a reputable career, and Josephine was a graceful presence at social functions. She would bear 4 children for him, and in her, many fans saw the grounding force behind the rising star. That was the public version. Privately, Wayne was restless. Hollywood sets teemed with flattery, offers, temptations. Rumors eventually began swirling about flirtations, nights out with co-stars, or extended absences that Josephine found out about only through secondhand chatter. Everything came to a head in the early 1940s. Wayne was cast in 7 Sinners, 1940, alongside the formidable Marlene Dietrich. Dietrich was known for her sultry persona, her smoky voice, and a talent for weaving herself into the fantasies of both men and women. She was also unafraid of courting controversy, as her androgynous style and storied private affairs could attest. On set with Wayne, sparks flew. The affair would last around 3 years, overlapping with another film they made together, The Spoilers, 1942. This was more than a casual fling. Tabloids buzzed about sightings of the pair around Hollywood, and Josephine, devout as she was, found herself heartbroken. She refused to grant Wayne a divorce immediately, partly out of religious conviction, partly out of desperation to hold her family together. For Wayne, the affair with Dietrich hammered a wedge between his public image, wholesome Western icon, and the reality that he was, in fact, a serial philanderer. Whispers circulated that he admired Dietrich's confidence as much as her allure, enjoying the experience of being pursued rather than doing the pursuing. Whatever the motivations, the affair ended his marriage, though not legally until 1945. Josephine collected $50,000 a year, an amount that translates to over $800,000 in modern value, and quietly faded from the spotlight with 4 children to raise. Wayne wasted no time moving on. He married Esperanza Chata Bauer in early 1946, fueling speculation that the Duke was less a man of principle than a man enthralled by new passions whenever they arose. This second union was anything but stable. Both Wayne and Bauer were rumored to have roving eyes, leading to explosive confrontations. Alcohol poured freely at gatherings, and tensions frequently ignited. In 1952, Bauer claimed Wayne had tried to shoot her during one of his drunken binges, a story that found its way into the press despite the best efforts of studios and PR teams to bury it. Wayne countered that Bauer was the aggressor and had threatened him with a pistol. His fans were forced to reconcile these disturbing accounts with their mental image of a brave Western hero. Though Wayne's star power was by then colossal, it was impossible to deny that his private life had the trappings of a saloon brawl, replete with shots fired and furniture smashed. By the time they divorced in 1954, Bauer was demanding a large alimony settlement, while Wayne, weary of the drama, painted himself as the victim of a volatile wife. The tabloids ate it up, with headlines pointing to public violence behind closed doors, ironically so, at odds with the stoic man who on screen would deliver lines about righteousness and honor. Though personal controversies often overshadowed it, Wayne's career soared during the late 1940s and 1950s, partly because he tapped into the political climate of the era. He positioned himself as an unapologetic patriot, the man who had once been overshadowed by other war heroes in real life, since Wayne never served in World War II, but who on screen epitomized American might. As president of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals from 1949 to 1951, Wayne embraced the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUACE. Many in Hollywood were uneasy about HUAC's tactics, which sought to blacklist actors, writers, and directors suspected of harboring communist sympathies. Wayne, however, believed staunchly that the country was under threat from a red tide. He campaigned vigorously for the blacklisting, supporting the ostracism of colleagues who refused to name names or who expressed leftist viewpoints. This public stance made him a hero to some and an antagonist to others. Films like High Noon, 1952, became focal points of ideological conflict. Wayne publicly slammed High Noon screenwriter Carl Foreman for including un-American themes, fueling a bitter dispute. Though his patriotism strengthened his bond with fans who adored his America Love It or Leave It approach, it sowed lasting resentments in Hollywood's more liberal circles. Even later in his life, Wayne rarely expressed any regret for these stances, casting them as necessary for preserving American values. The scars, however, lingered among those who had lost work or suffered condemnation during that era. Controversies continued to swirl around Wayne right into the 1960s and 1970s. By this point, a new generation of Americans was questioning established narratives about war, race, and authority. Wayne's brand of Western gallantry felt archaic to some youths who identified more with rock music and civil rights marches than with the cavalry or a shootout at high noon. Then came the bombshell interview published by Playboy in May 1971. The interviewer prompted Wayne to share his thoughts on a variety of social issues. Wayne did not mince words. He declared his belief in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility. Comments that, even in the context of the time, sparked outrage. He also made dismissive remarks about the injustices suffered by Native Americans, effectively arguing that their land had been put to better use by white settlers. The uproar was deafening. Civil rights groups and activists denounced him, calling him a relic of an oppressive past. In various interviews, Wayne tried to clarify that he was no racist, but he refrained from any meaningful apology. While his core fans saw this as typical Duke candor, many younger Americans distanced themselves from a man who had once symbolized rugged American heroism. The outcry lingered, tarnishing his last decade and sowing further divisions between him and an evolving Hollywood. Even as the controversies piled up, Wayne's health was quietly deteriorating. His larger-than-life presence on film sets, where he'd stride in wearing a cowboy hat and handle stunts with surprising agility, masked a body weakened by decades of heavy smoking and physically demanding roles. In September 1964, he underwent surgery at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, where doctors removed his entire left lung and 4 ribs to stop the spread of lung cancer. When tabloids got wind of the operation, Wayne brushed it off as just a spot on the lung, determined to sustain the image of the unstoppable cowboy. Friends and colleagues noted that, even on the set of The Sons of Katie Elder, 1965, Wayne relied on an oxygen tank just out of camera range. Still, his on-screen persona never hinted at vulnerability. Audiences only saw a man who soldiered on through dusty landscapes and barroom brawls like an indestructible force of nature. Years passed, and the cancer stayed in remission for a time. Some fans even labeled him the Miracle Man for bouncing back. But behind the scenes, Wayne was aware that his reprieve might be temporary, and that the day would come when his legendary vigor might fail him. The precariousness of his health came sharply into focus in January 1979, when doctors discovered he had developed stomach cancer. This time, the illness would not be so easily subdued. He underwent surgery on April 26, 1979, losing his entire stomach and part of his intestines. Complications followed: pneumonia, relentless infections, and the man who had once stood tall in the saddle found himself bedridden and frail, forced to rely on tubes and medication just to stay stable. Family members, including some of his 7 children? He'd had more offspring with later marriages, though not all of his unions were as scandal-ridden as the first 2, gathered at the UCLA Medical Center. Nurses recalled that, even in his weakened state, Wayne tried to maintain an air of stoicism, occasionally cracking a small joke or expressing hope that he might get back on his feet soon. But as the weeks rolled on, it became clear that he was losing this final battle. On the night of June 10, 1979, he slipped into a coma. By early morning, June 11, 1979, John Wayne was gone, passing at the age of 72. For years, his fans had seen him as bigger than life, an embodiment of frontier resilience who could shrug off bullets and tumbleweeds alike. The abrupt news, while not entirely unexpected given his condition, still sent shock waves across the country. President Jimmy Carter gave a statement calling him an American institution, underscoring the paradox. Even as Wayne's legacy was marred by controversy, he remained beloved by millions who clung to his image as the quintessential American cowboy. For many, that single phrase, an American institution, captured Wayne's mythic power. Like the best of American folklore, he stood for independence, directness, and a sense of can-do optimism, even though the details of his actual life were far more tangled. His funeral was small, private, held on June 15, 1979, at Pacific View Memorial Park in Corona del Mar, California. This quiet ceremony contrasted sharply with the larger-than-life tributes that fans would have expected. True to Wayne's personal style, the family kept the details minimal. No elaborate funeral or grand eulogies read before legions of admirers. For years, his gravesite remained unmarked. Only in 1999, 2 decades after his death, did the family place a plaque that bore a quote associated with him: "Tomorrow is the most important thing in life." It was a simple message, but it resonated with how Wayne had always tried to present himself publicly, looking forward, never backward, a man of action who didn't waste time on regrets. But regrets, or at least unresolved questions, swirled around the Duke's final decline. Some pointed to his lifelong smoking habit, which was a factor in his 1964 lung cancer surgery. Others highlighted the possibility of radiation exposure from filming The Conqueror, 1956 in Utah, near nuclear test sites. Dozens of cast and crew from that production later developed cancer, raising suspicions that the location had been contaminated. Wayne's stance was typically to dismiss such speculation, attributing his illness to mere bad luck or God's plan. He believed in forging ahead, rarely lingering on medical caution. By the time the stomach cancer took hold, it was well advanced, so whether radiation or cigarettes or genetic predisposition sealed his fate remains a matter of debate, fueling arguments among film historians and health experts to this day. As the initial wave of grief receded, tributes poured in. Media outlets replayed iconic Wayne scenes: the dusty approach in Stagecoach, 1939, the reluctant father figure in Red River, 1948, the resolute cavalry officer in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 1949. Some fans left wreaths of flowers outside theaters, others held small memorial screenings, and veterans groups across the nation saluted the man who had portrayed so many uniformed heroes, though Wayne himself never served in uniform. With the nostalgia came a deeper interrogation. Younger critics rewatched The Searchers, 1956, praising Wayne's nuanced portrayal of a vengeful racist anti-hero, while also pointing out the bitter irony that Wayne's personal views on race mirrored, in some respects, the ugliness of his character. Activists in Native American communities called attention to the Playboy interview, using Wayne's statements to question why the U.S. continued to lionize a man who dismissed historical injustice. Others in Hollywood weighed in on the blacklisting chapters, recalling how Wayne's unwavering anti-communist stance had cost some of them their livelihoods. Yet, if these controversies cast a shadow, they did not extinguish the public's fundamental fascination with him. He remained and remains a colossus whose silhouette, perched on horseback at the horizon, still has the power to stir the American imagination. Today one can still visit Pacific View Memorial Park and see that plaque, finally placed 2 decades after he was laid to rest, and reflect on a man whose footprints, both muddy and heroic, mark the intersection of Hollywood fantasy and America's real moral dilemmas. He was John Wayne, the unstoppable cowboy, the unstoppable soldier, the unstoppable father figure. And yet, like all of us, he was far from unbreakable. He found success beyond measure, but he also faced humiliations laid bare for the world to see. The lines between his on-screen persona and personal life were as blurred as wagon tracks in a desert storm. Perhaps that's the real reason he remains lodged in collective memory. He wasn't just a movie hero. He was a complicated soul whose private battles sometimes overshadowed his cinematic glories. For every iconic shot of Wayne riding off into the sunset, there was an off-camera moment brimming with conflict, scandal, or heartbreak. So we are left with an American legend who did not die on the field of Western valor but in a hospital bed, who made statements that betrayed the prejudices of his time, who broke hearts and faced heartbreak. And yet, in that same breath, we recall the stirring image of him approaching the camera, jaw set, delivering lines that resonate with a certain old-fashioned sense of honor. Therein lies the tension that keeps John Wayne alive in cultural discussions, the hero and the flawed man in one. By acknowledging both sides, we inch closer to understanding how mythology and reality coexisted in a single figure. His controversies may never be fully forgiven, and his heroics may never be fully overshadowed. That duality stands as a testament to the complexity of every iconic life, especially one that rode so high, cast so long a shadow, and ended with an unmarked grave that whispered as much about humility as any grand eulogy might have proclaimed.